Hi, my name is Alexis Wetzel, and this is my oral presentation project on global citizenship. So, what makes one a better global citizen? So, over the course of the semester, I feel I have become a better global citizen because I'm now more aware of global issues. And what I mean by that is I feel like when it comes to global issues, across the world, there's a very Americanized lens from like my perspective because I am an American, so obviously I don't see things the way that someone from another country would see them happening as they take place across the world. So I've gained this awareness through working with our various themes such as war, food scarcity, and religion. So with the food unit, that was like really the first thing we did. And we read multiple texts about the global issues and the concept of food. So the text that really comes to mind here is when Mr. Pirzada came to dine, and that was the year when Pakistan was engaged in civil war. So here we see that food really ultimately brings people together. There's a difference of religion, there's a difference of ideals here, but regardless, the dinners still brought them together. The candy that Mr. Pirzada presented to Lilia, it really brought people together. And this also brought to light too that Pakistan has been at war for longer than what, like, especially people from my generation really are aware of. Like, they weren't aware that Pakistan was at war prior to the war that they're kind of in now. And then we also talked about here too food scarcity. The scarcity of food can really have an impact on country and a culture and a group of people. So we really talked about Jack London's The Water Baby, and it is, I feel like, a very good representation of what food scarcity does to a country because we see the tricking of the sharks in the story. And the tricking of the sharks to me almost is like a symbolism to almost get others to kind of turn on each other to rise to the top. So we see the boy in the story, he's presenting the lobsters to the king, but he's getting the sharks to turn on each other. And I feel like that's almost a representation of maybe like someone maybe from a lower socioeconomic class, possibly getting people from like a higher standpoint to kind of turn on each other to capitalize off of that. So food scarcity can really, you have food and it can bring people together, but food scarcity and a lack of food can really draw people apart. Um, so then that also leads into with, bringing people together and then being pushed apart is we also see the theme of religion and how it varies. So we've talked about multiple different religions over the course. And something that really stood out to me was the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, where you have the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path that leads to the end of suffering. And to me, that's really interesting because you see in a lot of different religions, you see in like Christianity, that's a very widespread religion. And in other religions, you don't really see the acknowledgement of the idea of suffering, which I feel like the idea of suffering is what a lot of people can relate to, especially if they're from, different countries and they're going through different things and there's war and bad things happening within a country. And Buddhism is really the one where you see, the truth of suffering, that there's an acknowledgement that there are things that cause it, but there are also ways to end that sort of suffering. And varying religions and beliefs can really present a different perspective on moral principles. And you really see that in some of the texts that we read over the course of the semester. So we dealt with Altars in the Street. Altars in the Street is about, Buddhist children, where they were about to be met with suffering. I mean, these are literal children, and a lot of people, especially we see in America through social media and various different platforms, that when children suffer, that's when you really have a big problem. basically people hate to see children suffering, but in Altars in the Street, it's back to that general idea of the overall acceptance of the suffering. And it's to the point where the children are presenting these altars in the street because they know that they're about to be met with these tanks and this horrible bloodshed. And there's the overall acceptance and that the suffering could be their path to nirvana, which is what in what we learned about Buddhism is kind of what comes next for them. So it's almost that like the suffering will be over and they will go to nirvana, almost as like when you see in Christianity, or if someone is ill or going through pain when they pass away and are said to go to heaven, that their pain and their suffering is gone. We also talked about in Allen Ginsberg's Howl, which we talked about the topic of nihilism. And at the time of Howell's release, it was very controversial. And it was almost seen to be as atheistic and ungodly just because of the vulgar nature and the controversial topics of that time period. And we actually see Ginsberg oppose nihilism. And nihilism is the rejection of moral and religious principles and to believe that life basically is meaningless. There are, there's no God, there are no, religious morals. So Ginsberg straight up opposes nihilism. I mean, Ginsberg was born Jewish. I believe it was said that he practiced Buddhism at some point in his life. And we see this quote, I mean, here where it says, who studied Plotinus post St. John of the Cross telepathy and Bob Kabbalah because the cosmos instinctively vibrated at their feet in Kansas. So there is an acknowledgement of religion here. So for people to kind of say that it's atheistic and ungodly simply just because they disagree with Ginsberg's opinion and his thoughts, is kind of an example too of how religion can kind of draw people apart. So also too, we talked about war and honestly with the war aspect of what we talked about over the semester, it really is it's very closely knit with religion and food. We can kind of see that like a lot of times religion can cause war. It's simply just because of difference of religion. I mean, you see it with the Germans and the Jews, and we also see that food can kind of sort of end wars, and it can also make war worse as well. I mean, we see examples through history of food sources being cut off, to starve people out. I mean, you see it directly on the front lines. And I believe it was World War II. So all of these themes are very closely knit. And we really see it here in the things they carried in discussions of the Vietnam War, which here we see are really just a mental battle and the PTSD of the men in the things that they carried and them watching, they're watching people die everywhere, and then they're watching people that they really grow close with die as well. And starvation in field conditions are a big thing because it's when one of the men died and the things they carried, I mean, they basically kind of almost went through his stuff and claimed it as their own. And we also see a theme of religion in the things they carried. Too, with Kiowa, where he carried a copy of the New Testament on him, on his person, and read it at various times. If there was downtime where they could kind of just almost relax, he was reading the New Testament. And so we kind of see all of these themes kind of being contested in the things they carried. And then we also see this here too in Maus about the religious persecution of the Jews, with the Germans. And there's the convention of, rats, where this idea, with the religious persecution and just Jewish people being hated so widely across Germany and across Europe at that time, that in Maus in the comic, there's a part where one of the mice is like, "Oh my gosh, there's rats down here." And to me, I was thinking that almost like a rat could be referred to as a snitch. And so that was something obviously that they had to deal with as well. And then also too, with different religions, and you see that in war and how they can be persecuted and fought against because of the different religions. you can almost see a loss of identity and honestly, like widely, even as a global citizen, I mean, to me, there should be a mutual respect for other views and religions. So in conclusion, diving into these themes and how they are intertwined has really expanded my views on global issues. Like I said in the beginning, like I only ever saw things from the American side of things. So being able to read literature from authors from other places across the globe and to read works from other from people from other backgrounds, it really just broadened my horizons truly. And there were a lot of things I really learned, and I feel like honestly, I've kind of become a more open-minded person after taking this course, just because of the things that we read and the things that we discussed in class. Too, because I mean, we have in class across my peers, like there's just such a widespread difference of opinion. And everyone is very respectful about it. So I feel like as a class, I mean, we've grown as global citizens, and I think we're all pretty productive global citizens. But I also feel like there's always a better way. Like you can always become a better global citizen. Like nobody's perfect. Um, so yeah, that was my oral presentation, and I hope you enjoyed.